Hi everyone, and welcome to this session around the TEALS programme. My name is Pete Marshman. I'm the secondary sector lead for BCS, and I'm joined by my colleague Tig Williams.
Hi, I'm Tig. I'm also a secondary lead, and I work with the training programme as well. So, welcome to the programme. To give you a feel for the overview, the idea of the TEALS programme is that people from industry with relevant context and relevant experience will work in classrooms in Key Stage 3 and 4 with students. So the idea here is you're going to get professionals coming in regularly to a class to work with those students. So it should benefit your students, both from a motivational point of view, and hopefully it will improve uptake of the subject and understanding of the subject. So if we could, next slide, Pete. So the TEALS program started in America a few years ago, and Microsoft funded it back then, as they are in the UK. Over here, it's being delivered by BCS with Microsoft funding through Computing at School, as you can see from my branding. The idea is that we take computing teachers and we help them improve their own skill bases. We're also going to be working with non-specialists within other departments to help them improve their knowledge and add context to some of these lessons. So volunteers will be in a classroom on a regular basis. So when they hook up the school, it'll be the same class. Okay. And the idea here is that it makes computing more appealing. People are going to see somebody like them in a classroom talking about a job they do with passion. Next slide, please. So your volunteers will connect with a particular class. So some volunteers will have a preference for Key Stage 3 or 4. Most are fairly open. So as a head of department, you will take your volunteers, you will look at the times they can attend, and we would expect you to pair that volunteer up with a class. They will be appearing every single week during the term. So throughout the school year, that volunteer will be with the same class over and over. So it's not just a drop in and say hi, isn't IT great? This is somebody who's going to build a rapport with those classes, who's going to work with the classroom teacher to help add context, give a bit of capacity. They will become part of your department. So you'll be arranging for them to be in there as part of your team, and they'll work with your teachers with their planning. Okay. As a leader, you will have the job of managing that relationship, of deciding where they go and how they go. Now, at the moment, TEALS has been running for 1 year. We've just had a pilot going. So there's a number of schools in London, Reading, Birmingham and Manchester that have taken part in the first year of this programme. So we're moving into the second year and we're expanding this programme into being more schools, obviously taking into account the improvements from the pilot. But you will be joining part of what aims to be a national scaled programme. Now, just a bit of feedback here. I don't need to read this to you. You can read, but Matt joined as part of the pilot, so in one of the Birmingham schools, and he has found it's really improved engagement in his classrooms. It's given students context which they wouldn't have had. Some of his non-specialists working with the volunteers have improved their own subject knowledge, and it's given them more confidence delivering because they've had an expert in the room who's been able to talk around some of the areas they weren't so comfortable with. So it's definitely helping those that have been engaged in the initial pilot. Next slide, Pete.
Thanks, Tig. So I'm just going to go for a little bit around sort of your role as a teacher, what teaching with TEALS actually feels like. In front of you, you can see the Manchester team, the Manchester Communications Academy there, who are already part of the initial process in phase 1 and already working with volunteers. So going through your role as a TEALS teacher and what it involves, it's really about cultivating a shared purpose. So it's about you understanding the impact of the volunteers understanding your role in the classroom, and ultimately it's about the young people having that supportive environment that encourages them to learn and grow, for you to learn and grow, and also for the volunteers to learn and grow. And you should be doing that as like a collective triangle of growth between that team in TEALS in your school. And just to go into a little bit about what that kind of means in terms of that shared purpose, it's about setting clear expectations. So that can be done through kind of a collaborative planning with your volunteers, sharing your vision for computing, you know, not just now, but in years to come, so that your volunteers can help you support that with enrichment activities, or there might be additional contacts they have or additional information they can bring in. The more they know about where you want to go with your curriculum, the more you'll be able to benefit from those volunteers, and the more that they will benefit from the fact that their participation in your lessons will be more impactful for the students. And also to sort of guide your decision making as well. So by having that conversation with your volunteer, it might in turn adjust your schemes of work, your resources. There might be particular things that your volunteer shares that you want to use in future lessons. So that allows you to sort of, you know, make strategic decisions about your curriculum offer. And the most important bit, as I said earlier, was about your vision for computing. And these are just some ideas about what your vision might be. It might be a combination of these things. It might be none of these things. But what's really important is to take time to think about where do you want your curriculum to go. And that really enables you to make the most of the volunteers as you get to know them and their skill set. So you must bear this in mind. This isn't just about, you know, having almost like additional assistance support of your pupils that need stretching or need extra support. It's much wider than that. It's about really impacting your curriculum, not just for that class, but for other classes as well. So have a think about during a session, like, you know, what's the purpose of a TEALS class to you? What is it that you would like to get out of it in the long term? And in terms of connecting with volunteers, you know, BCS will do some work with organisations such as Microsoft, such as the HG Foundation, to sort of assemble some volunteers. But alongside that, we require the school to communicate with parents, guardians, partners, careers partners that you might have, to increase that group of volunteers. Obviously, in some areas of the country, it's going to be easier to find volunteers than others, just due to the proximity of, you know, of higher populations and IT organisations. So it's really a partnership between BCS and your school to help find those volunteers. And the induction of those volunteers is really, really important. So thinking about the logistics of how they come into your school, how do they reach your classroom every week? What communication lines have you got? What happens if you're absent? What happens if the volunteer can't come in for that week? So almost those things that seem very granular are really, really important to think about very early in the process, so that you can get those processes working in your school. And then obviously it's about creating that culture and different ideas and perspectives. So it's not just the volunteer you have in your school, they are connected with other volunteers. So you might find actually in the wider volunteer network, there's a volunteer that can support what you're doing in the classroom remotely, or there might be some linkage between them that really sort of impacts what you're doing in your school. And obviously just making sure that all volunteers know what's coming so they can prepare. The more you give them from the start, and, you know, progressively through the weeks, the more they can prepare, and then the impact will be higher, just as you would planning your own lessons and working with the wider team in school. And obviously diversity, equity and inclusion are absolutely paramount to what we're doing. And Tig's going to share a little bit with you about the process, the sort of cycle of this programme that really brings that out as well. And here's one of our volunteers that's already active in the programme. And really, there's a nice little quote there about sort of going back to his days in school, and what kind of triggered that spark that he wanted to be involved in a career in IT, and how he can try and bring that back and give back to that class. So that's just, you know, one statement that's, you know, really stood out. So I'll hand back over to Tig now, who's going to just talk you through the journey a little bit.
So initially, the first tranche would obviously be to express an interest to BCS. And then we'll have a conversation where we'll talk in more detail about the commitments and the requirements from BCS's point of view and from the school's point of view in terms of the time. So that's the first step. And once everybody's up to speed and happy with that, the next step is that we will start thinking about pairing you with some volunteers. Now, that first commitment is going to involve the head teacher at the school, because they've got to be on board for this. It's going to involve the head of department, or at least the lead teacher, who's going to be managing the volunteers, because there's a commitment on them, and to an extent it'll be the community coordinator at BCS. The next steps for you then are starting to look at pairing up the volunteers, looking at the logistics of getting the volunteers in. So in this second step here, the head of department and the volunteers are going to be having a conversation about whether they're going into Key Stage 3 or 4, which teacher or teachers they're going to pair with, what their role could look like in the classroom. Now, that first conversation is going to be working out where they're going to go. At some point, you will have paired them with a class, and they're going to be sitting down with a classroom teacher regularly, we would hope, and planning what their input is going to look like, maybe suggesting ideas. If you're planning a curriculum session on networking and you have a network engineer on board, obviously they can contribute something to how that unit could look, how they could contribute, and where things could go. They may even be able to look at the scheme of work and say, oh, have you thought of doing this or that to improve things? So there's an element here of logistics. It is also at this point you'll need to think about things. So for example, your volunteers will all be DBS'd for child workforce. So we would hope they won't need to go to reception and then wait there for you to collect them before every lesson. We'd hope they'll be going straight into your department as a member of your team. But that's the kind of things that need to come out during that conversation. If they need badges to get into the classroom, that's where we'd organise this. And at that point, when we know roughly what they're doing and how they're going to take part, this is where the teaching starts. So the volunteer will go into the classroom with your teachers, and they will participate in lessons. Now, I would hope that the lead, so the lead teacher on this, managing the volunteers, would keep an eye on things, make sure things are running smoothly, because obviously things don't always go perfectly, and this is the point where we'd hope people would pick that up. So everybody's going to be involved in this section, just to make sure in that action that we get a smooth process that benefits the students. Because at the end of the day, this whole program is about making computing more attractive to your students and increasing both engagement and outcomes for those students. So this needs to really revolve around those students. Regularly after that, during the program, there is a reflection process where we will be talking to everybody we can involved in the program to look at how things have worked, where we think we can improve, anything we can change next time round. And that's an ongoing process. Now, we're still in the pilot phase, so changes will happen as a result of that reflection, but that is also a commitment on the school where the lead, the teachers, the volunteers will need to be engaging with that reflection at some point and talking to probably community coordinator or their representative about how things have worked and how they'd like to do them differently. Your next slide, please, Pete. So one of the other things that we don't always think about as teachers when we get a volunteer in the class is actually, what does my volunteer want? If you're going to get the most out of your volunteer, just like you would with any member of your team, you need to have those conversations with them about, what do they want to get out of this? Where are their areas of strength? Where are their areas of weakness? What would they like to do most? What do they want? Some volunteers might want to be involved in extracurricular clubs. Some may just want to get into the class and see the teaching. Some may want to work in their area of expertise to inspire kids. So having these conversations with the volunteer, making those connections, allow your volunteers to really flourish, to make those large impacts that we'd like to see. And again, when we talk about real world connections and effective team delivery, your volunteer is going to be seeing the skills, and even if it's an area they're not an expert in, if they're working in IT and computing, they will be seeing applications of skills outside their area regularly. They'll be interacting with those other professions, and they have passion for their subject. It's what they've chosen to do with their life. So we can tap into that passion. We can use that expertise and share that context with our kids, because actually they are not seen by the children as another teacher. They're seen by the children as somebody coming in who works in real world. So the kids will listen to what they're saying, and it will make a big difference to your students. And again, it kind of gives you an opportunity to also show them teaching is an art form. So your volunteers will be coming into the classroom with no idea of the skills involved in teaching. So it gives you an opportunity maybe to model teaching, to show off our profession and say, look, there is more to this than meets the eye. The classroom management is not just a case of expecting the kids to get on. So we can show some of these skills to our volunteers to help them not only bed in, but to also, give them a feel for teaching. Next slide, please, Pete. So when we talk to a volunteer, this is a slide the volunteers have given, and it's really, really important for us that unlike in the US where there are many models, so in the US they could be a co-teacher, they could be a learning facilitator. In the UK, the volunteer is a support. The teacher is still leading the class. The teacher is in charge of the class, their behaviour, what they're doing, where they're going. The volunteer is helping the teacher, but the teacher is still leading. Now, it might be there will be the occasional situation where a volunteer might want to lead something. That will have been planned in advance. And if a volunteer is leading a session, I would still be expecting the teacher to be managing the class and running the class. The volunteer is supplying the expertise. And that's really important because, you know, DFE's feedback into this is that the volunteers will not be teaching. They will be assisting a teacher. So we need to be aware of that. I'll hand back over to you, Pete.
Thanks, Dick. So we've talked a little bit about, you know, what's involved and you know, the logistics. And what we want to share really is a little bit more about the teacher training. So as part of this TEALS programme, there is some dedicated training with you as a teacher, and obviously to help you understand a little bit more detail about deploying volunteers, about how we can use volunteers to sort of enhance effective pedagogy, and also about like building capacity. This whole program really is also about building capacity, building leadership capacity in what are normally very small departments in computing and computer science. And we've talked about the importance of logistic and onboarding, and it's very different with every school. And what we've learned from the pilot program is because these are very different in every school, we've got some training that will be set up for you to enable you to really think about how that part of it can be almost seamless so that you can maximize the role of the volunteer and the time the volunteer has in your school. So this training will be carried out online, and there will be separate modules, as you can see listed here. And there are some commitments beyond that initial training, sort of almost that get ready training. And there's things like sort of termly meetings with other TEAL teachers, so you can share best practice, share how you're doing things, share the roles of your volunteers, share what's worked, share what hasn't worked so well. Obviously, there'll be other things that you'll need to do, such as maybe organise your volunteer to come in and have a tour of your school before they actually join for their first class. So that kind of induction role that you will have is an important thing for you to consider. Obviously, communication with volunteers, we just talked about that in terms of, you know, what channels of communication you have, how that works if there's a supply teacher taking that lesson, and organising that between you and a volunteer. The role of this programme is not for BCS to really be in the middle of those communications. It's really about connecting you with the volunteer so that you can work with them directly and effectively in that way. And there's an evaluation process where there will be things such as surveys, a visit to your school, maybe just to find out what the pupils are thinking, what the volunteers are thinking, what you're thinking. So it'll be your support with that evaluation process, which is really important in kind of highlighting and improving the programme over the years to come. And yeah, there's a statement here about the importance, as Tig said earlier, about this. And we sort of, you know, this is a really important thing just to revisit about. By going through that training, by working through that cyclical program, these are the sort of things that can come out of it if you're really strategic in the vision for computing in your school. So really, finally, is what to do next. So if you've listened to this kind of webinar and you feel that this is something for you and this is something you really want to engage with, we'd be delighted to hear from you. You can apply at bcs.org/TEALS. And yeah, we really hope this has been sort of informative and helpful for you. And obviously, we'd love as many schools to apply as possible as we scale this programme.
Good luck. Hopefully, we'll see you soon.
Thank you.